the Ordinance Committee meeting of December 6th to order, and can we start with a roll call?
Councilmember Jordan.
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Present.
Chair Kristen Sneddon.
Here. Thank you. And do we have any changes to the agenda?
We do not.
Thank you. And any public comment for items not on the agenda?
At this time, we do not.
Okay, thank you. Then with that, we will invite staff presentation on zoning ordinance amendments for accessory dwelling units.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Sneddon and committee members. My name is Jillian Ferguson, and I am a long-range assistant planner for the Community Development Department. May I also introduce Brenda Beltz, project planner and plan checker, and Dan Gullett, interim city planner. I also requested that Ryan DiGiulio, the city's fire battalion chief, be present to address any questions regarding ADUs in the city's high fire hazard areas. This afternoon, I will be presenting the city's accessory dwelling unit ordinance amendments. The purpose of this hearing is to review the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance for ADUs and JADUs and request your committee forward a recommendation to City Council for adoption. I will briefly provide a background for ADUs, then present the proposed ADU ordinance amendments. These amendments have been organized into 3 categories: cleanup items, 2023 state requirements, and finally staff proposed local standards, which will be discussed in more detail. I will then go over next steps. Just a quick reminder that ADUs are self-contained additional housing units, which range in size from 150 square feet for an efficiency studio and up to 1,200 square feet for a unit with multiple bedrooms. According to State Housing and Community Development, or HCD, ADUs are an innovative, affordable, and effective option for adding much-needed housing in California. A junior ADU is a unit located within existing walls of a primary residence, including within an attached garage that cannot exceed 500 square feet in size. The owner must occupy the rest of the house, and the JADU requires a separate exterior entrance. ADU applications have been very popular. Since 2017, the city has received 916 ADU applications. Of those, 22% are detached, 12% are attached additions, and 66% consist of conversions. ADUs can either include detached, attached, or constructed above an existing or new garage, or be constructed using converted livable space within the primary residence or converted non-livable space such as a garage or accessory building. The city's ADU ordinance allows 2 different types of ADUs, standard ADUs and special ADUs. Standard ADUs are allowed 1 per lot and are not allowed in the foothill and extreme foothill high fire hazard areas. Standard ADUs differ from special ADUs by having greater size and height flexibility. The size of a standard ADU may range from 850 to 1,200 square feet, if detached, or a maximum of 50% of existing primary unit floor area if attached. Currently, the maximum height of a standard ADU may match the primary unit's height, or 17 feet, whichever is greater, and in some cases, up to 30 feet in height if constructed over a garage. Regarding open yard standards, a standard ADU needs to retain the open yard for the primary unit, but the open yard can be reduced in area and dimension, and there is location flexibility. A special ADU is mandated by state law, and 1 or more may be allowed per lot depending on the existing number of units. Special ADUs are the only ADUs allowed in the foothill and extreme foothill high fire area. A special ADU must be a detached unit or a conversion of existing floor area. Currently, a maximum of 800 square feet is allowed if detached in new construction with a maximum of 16 feet in height. Special ADUs are also exempt from the requirement to preserve the open yard for the primary unit. This map demonstrates the number and location within the city, within the city's high fire areas for ADU projects since 2017. 19% of ADUs are within the foothill and extreme foothill areas. ADUs in high fire areas must be designed to meet high fire construction standards as determined by the fire code official. Now I will discuss the proposed ADU ordinance amendments. The scope of the amendments include both the inland and coastal zoning ordinances. As previously mentioned, there are 3 categories of proposed changes. Cleanup items, which include minor changes to wording, formatting, or location. State mandated requirements, which include new or changed content consistent with 2023 state law requirements, and amendments to local standards to facilitate ADUs, which are consistent with the 2023 draft housing element. The focus of this presentation will be on the amendments to maximum height for ADUs and changes to local standards. The other categories or changes due to their minor nature are not discussed in this presentation. Now I will discuss required and recommended building height changes. One of the more significant changes made to the state ADU law is related to maximum building height. The city's current ADU height regulations are less restrictive than state law for standard ADUs and are the same as state law for special ADUs. The changes required by state law allow a range of heights from 16 feet to 25 feet, depending on if the unit is attached, detached, zoned for single unit or multi-unit, or within a half mile of a high-quality transit corridor. Staff recommends blending the current city height standards with state law changes to increase the allowed height for certain ADUs. For a standard detached ADU, staff recommends increasing the maximum height limit from 17 feet to 18 feet, city-wide. In addition, an attached ADU may now be built up to 25 feet in height. A special detached ADU will be increased in height from 16 to 18 feet to be consistent with state law. Limiting special ADUs to 1 story and 2 bedrooms is proposed to reduce the size and intensity of ADUs in fire-prone neighborhoods. It is also intended to address privacy concerns for adjacent properties when 2 special ADUs are proposed, especially given the state-mandated 4-foot interior setback. Here are some examples of the different ways that ADUs can be built in compliance with maximum height standards. Example 1 shows an existing 2-story primary unit that is allowed to have a 2-story detached standard ADU of the same height. Example 2 shows an existing 1-story primary unit that is allowed to have a 1-story detached standard or special ADU up to 18 feet in height. Examples 3 and 4 show an attached standard ADU that is the same height as the primary unit, or 25 feet, whichever is greater. Examples 5 and 6 show how an existing 1-story primary unit may still have a 2-story standard ADU if it is either constructed over a garage or through the discretionary design review process. Now I will discuss proposed changes to local standards. As previously mentioned, the 3rd category of proposed amendments include minor improvements to local requirements intended to make it easier to build ADUs. These changes will implement the city's draft housing element policy recommendations for ADUs. The first staff recommendation is a revised open yard encroachment. When proposing an ADU over a 2-car garage, we revised the open yard standards to accommodate a small laundry room or storage area. A maximum 150 square foot addition is proposed to be allowed to encroach into the open yard that serves the primary residence. The next staff recommended change regards converted non-livable space. Under the current rules, if 2 new ADUs are proposed for a multi-unit development, the double ADU must either be detached new construction or the lot must be developed with at least 8 existing dwelling units. This is because the current law only allows 25% of the existing number of units to be converted from existing floor area. Staff recommends allowing up to 2 special ADUs instead of 1 to be converted from existing floor area. This will allow the conversion of an existing garage or basement to 2 special ADUs instead of requiring new construction. Here is a converted non-livable floor area example. This is an existing multi-unit building. The area of work proposed is 2 ADUs located in the garage area. The current ADU rules allow only 1 ADU to be converted in the garage. Or they could propose 2 new ADUs that take up the entire open yard area. The proposed standard would allow 2 ADUs to be located within the garage, thereby preserving the open yard. The final staff recommended change involves the conversion of upper floor commercial areas to ADUs, preserving ground floor commercial areas for retail. State law allows residential floor area to be converted to ADUs, but it does not allow commercial floor area, such as retail or office, to be converted. Amendments to the city's local ordinance would allow upper floor commercial spaces to be converted to ADUs and provide more flexibility in the adaptive reuse of existing buildings. Staff recommends only the upper floor areas, not the ground floor commercial spaces, be allowed to convert to an ADU to support and maintain mixed-use development along commercial corridors. The Planning Commission held 1 hearing on November 17th, recommending that City Council adopt the proposed amendments. Now I will share next steps. After your recommendation, we are scheduled to go to City Council in January. We will then submit the adopted ordinance amendments to HCD for their review. We will also start preparing a local coastal program amendment for the adopted Title 28 amendments for California Coastal Commission certification. Regarding the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA does not apply to adoption of an ordinance implementing the state accessory dwelling unit law. Staff recommends reviewing the proposed amendments to the zoning ordinance for Title 28 and Title 30 for accessory dwelling units and forwarding a recommendation to City Council for adoption. Before I close, while staff consulted with the City Attorney's Office, the requirement for a 2-bedroom maximum for an 800 square foot special ADU should be deleted from page 23 on attachment 3 and page 25 on attachment 4.
Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. Chair Sneddon, committee members, I just wanted to explain a little bit further on that. That is the 2-bedroom limit on a special ADU that's 800 square feet. In reviewing HCD's interpretation of the ordinance, they consider a limitation of bedrooms to be a constraint on development and potentially discrimination against a protected class such as familial status in limiting the bedrooms. So it's our recommendation that we just strike that one clause. It's, for the record, it's in Title 30, it's subsection 30.185.040. L4, and then in Title 28, it's subsection 28.86.090.
Will you repeat that again,
Point 1,
please?
of course.
Or the page number in the attachment in our
Okay,
documents.
so it's in attachment 3, page 23,
Thank you.
and it's the subsection 040L4. And then in attachment 4, it's subsection 28.86.090 D1. You'll find that on page 25.
And you would leave it, when you're saying strike it, it's just striking the 2-bedroom limitation, but not the 800 square
Correct.
foot maximum? Okay.
Yes, the 800 square feet, I think, is self-limiting in its development capacity, and the limited number of bedrooms is also regulated by the building code, so there is a minimum size.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we'll open for questions from the committee. Do I have questions yet, or? Sure. Okay, Councilmember Jordan?
Thank you. Ms. Ostringer, could I maybe just follow right back on that bedroom issue, because that was one of my questions. It's kind of out of order, but I don't want to get down in the weeds because I don't know much what I'm talking about anymore on this subject. But in general, on ADUs, some of the complaints I've heard is that going into, say, a single-family neighborhood, somebody maybe they have a bigger lot, so in whatever area they're in, they get an 800 or 900 or 1,000 square foot allowance there, and they're putting 4 or 5 or 6 bedrooms into those projects, and basically, you know, well, my opinion, basically, rather than just adding a secondary living unit, they're building a dorm. And does all this play into the issue that you were just talking about with that particular example too, that in general, we cannot start to remedy that by limiting, having a bedroom ratio per square feet or something like that?
Chair Sneddon.
Per square feet of total ADU?
Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Jordan, I think there could be some wiggle room, but in general, it's regulated by the building code. So there is a minimum size, and then there's also certain livability functions in the building code with regards to ingress, egress, windows. So in designing them, they are site constrained with, even if it's say it's a 1,200 square foot one, there are those design constraints that building code, health and safety are going to regulate just on their own.
I think it's pretty small though, like 200 square foot of living unit, state building code. I mean, when I've had this discussion before on non-ADU bedroom materialization down, say, around City College and single family homes, where it goes from a traditional couple bedroom 1960s tract home, and all of a sudden there's 9 people or 6 people living in it, and the bedrooms have been reconfigured. Somebody's told me that numbers, I don't remember who, anecdotally, that the state building code allows you a pretty small footprint minimum to put in there. Is that?
Yeah, I don't know what the minimum is,
But let's
unfortunately.
just say for giggles, it's 200 square feet, and people are, and I'm just making stuff up because I don't have a particular situation. I've just heard this anecdotally. And so an ADU ends up in a single-family neighborhood, and it's got 4 bedrooms in it. We are reluctant to get into that discussion because of legislation above us.
Councilmember Jordan, it's more along the lines of whether it would be a discrimination resulting in a smaller bedroom. So you could say, for example, you couldn't have 3 children in 1 bedroom and you have a 7 household family.
And the flip side is you could have 4 non-related adults, all with cars, in that location too, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I have some specific questions, which again are way too down in the weeds, but I'm going to take a slug at those just to see if you can help me out. But my number one overarching question is, if we're rewriting this right now, and it's as a result of legislation again, why is what we're doing appear to be reactive only again to comply with state law and minor word cleanups? Why aren't we doing a comprehensive review of where we are with the AUD program, how well it's working, how well the process is working, what the benefits are, if we're happy with the type of housing stock that's resulting in, and what could we do at that time to tweak it? As Mr. Gullett knows, I've been around some time in this, and I just know it takes the sea parting to rewrite ordinances. You don't just you don't do that 4 or 5 times a year or even twice a year. And so my worry is this is an opportunity to do that, but you'll tell me when we're going to do it, but that will really not happen for another couple of years. So that's kind of my thing. I think there's a lot of dissatisfaction with what we've produced, how we've produced, the process to produce, and that could be on either side of the argument. And why are we not taking that opportunity to do the typical Santa Barbara thing and do outreach, get stakeholders involved, get neighborhoods involved, get the development stakeholders involved, and tweak it even better?
Chair Sneddon, committee member Jordan, thanks for the question. It's a very good question. We are in draft with our housing element right now, and the decision was to bring forward some of those very specific changes to the ADU ordinance along with this, because we do see it as an opportunity as well. This is our 5th opportunity in 5 years, I think, because the legislature keeps changing ADU law. We feel an urgency to this too. We do want it in place. We don't want this very large gap between when state law is effective and when our ordinances have caught up with it. And that's really limiting the scope of this effort right now. Our draft housing element program does call for extensive outreach and deep analysis of how we can better facilitate ADUs, better facilitate even deed restricting ADUs, if perhaps we'll allow additional ADUs in exchange for them to be deed restricted, but to explore all of that further, make our process more streamlined, and have our regulations more in line with what we want to see.
So in the spirit of Holiday Fun, though, what you're describing, of course, is an 8-year program that just commits us to attempting to do that in an 8-year program once we end up with the fund that is the housing element, rather than rather than the simpler, blunter way that I describe it, I think, which is, if we're going to rewrite the ordinance, why aren't we tackling, I could put together a Cliff Notes for Mike that, say, here's people I've talked to, here's examples, why aren't we doing it? And many of them you would say, yeah, it's messed up and we should be fixing those. And so my worry is that we say okay to that, and then we look up in another year or two and we still haven't started to address whatever you hear as opinions up here on the positives and negatives of the ADU process. I talked to Jay Higgins this morning. He keeps count of this stuff, and he says he's had, in 8 years, he's had 24 planning commission meetings on housing related to ADU or AUD. So I get the pressure from above. I get the pressure from below. But what would be the consequence if you're going to have a gap of 3 weeks or 2 weeks, right? From January 1st to potential adoption. What's the difference if you have a gap of that or 3 months? What's the consequence?
Yeah, I'd defer that to Ms. Ostringer, but just to be responsive to this housing element, it is different than previous housing elements. We're essentially asked to identify month and day of when we expect to get these programs done. And if ADU changes are more of a priority for council, we can prioritize that accordingly.
So that month and day is already cooked, right? We've submitted, we've got responses, we're working on our response. That's already kind of passed through here with kind of a wave of the wand because of the timing and the need to get it off. And so is that a date that's already on the horizon?
It's a date that can be changed in the review with Planning Commission and City Council coming up. So we did make changes in response to HCD's comments on draft housing element, and you'll see those. And some of what HCD asked for is more specificity of timing and more specificity of what these programs are.
Okay. Sustringer, so do you have an opinion on, so we have this gap of a couple weeks into January potentially, and if the gap was 3 months, do we expect the governor to come down here and serve us with a lawsuit because we're gapping on that and we want to do more changes on our ordinance?
So Chair Sneddon, Councilmember Jordan, to that question, the state has kind of forced us into Band-Aid approach ordinance amendments because they've been changing them every year for 6 years, so we're trying to keep up. In this case, would it be a gap of 3 months? I don't think it probably would be. If it was 3 months, I would say, no, we could deal with that. What we're trying to do is make it easier for the public because under these new ordinance changes, our ordinance, as long as it's not conflicting with state law, will apply. So it's a little bit easier for the public if there's an ordinance in place that matches the state requirements to be able to submit their projects as they're going through, as opposed to have this gap and this uncertainty. So that's why the urgency that Mr. Gullett talked about. But the state law will apply until we get our ordinance in place. In some cases, our proposed changes are also cleanup to make it clearer to the public on what is expected of them. And it doesn't preclude us from being tasked later with a larger overhaul of the project and the ADU ordinance as a whole.
Okay, I'll come back to that in comments. Trying hard not to go there. So staff have you guys all seen the RRM letter? So news to me, but I'm detached. So one of the comments made, I'll describe this as best I can, and then you can tell me what I'm really talking about. So one of the comments made had to do with an incorporation of mixed use that wasn't mixed use before. So you had some type of commercial, you're now adding ADUs, or maybe I'm not remembering right, and maybe it's something that had livable or non-livable space, and now you're going to be able to use that space or not use that space. And the track that we uniquely require that project to do is to come in and do one of those first, and then circle back and ask for permission and do the second part of the project afterwards, okay? So I've probably explained this poorly, but I see you're nodding your head. So why is that? What's the purpose of doing it that way? What is it doing for us? Because I know the response from the other side is it's slowing them down and messing up the goal of facilitating production of ADUs, and going along with that would be in the shortest, most effective time. So can you speak to that?
And Chair Sneddon, Committee Member Jordan, so I'm going to do my best.
Okay.
And then I might ask Ms. Beltz to fill in some blanks. So the city's ADU ordinance allows both livable floor area like a bedroom and non-livable floor area like a garage to be converted to one ADU. The only time that an ADU is restricted to a conversion of non-livable floor area is when more than one special ADUs are proposed. The city's ordinance is consistent with the state law, which limits more than one ADU to be converted from non-livable space.
So when you say consistent with the state law, is being consistent with the state law proactively facilitating production of ADUs, or is it not? If one is being consistent with state law generating the most ADUs possible, or is choosing to be consistent with the state law and not be more liberal, being the better choice there to facilitate more ADUs? You're going to tell me that's a decision to be made up here, and that's kind of where I want to get to some of these things that in my belief, this is a decision that's been made somewhere else, in that we like ADUs in certain situation, but somebody has chosen to say, all we have to do is be consistent with state law. We don't have to be better than the state laws. So what's preventing us in that particular situation from doing something better than the requirement, the minimum requirement of the state law?
Committee Member Jordan, that's an excellent point. We are actually proposing to be better than state law in this case. So right now, state law says at least one, and up to 25% can be converted. And we're proposing to make that more flexible, more permissible, and allow at least two instead of one. So that's an increase, to allow more flexibility for ADUs in these areas. The livable versus non-livable, I think that has to do with the impacts to the neighborhood, impacts to the residents in an apartment building. If you're converting garages or carports, you're not really affecting the dwelling units as much. If you were to convert, let's say you had a 30-unit apartment building and you were going to try to convert a quarter of those units into ADUs, what would that look like for those units? There's more impacts on the residents when you're converting livable space
And what
in
kind of
multi-unit.
impact?
Well, let's say you had 20 two-bedroom units, and you were going to convert a quarter of those into studios. So now you've got people who had a two-bedroom unit, and now they have a one-bedroom unit, and half their unit was turned into an ADU.
So what
Right.
are we worried about there?
I don't know. That's
Okay,
part of
I mean,
what-
that's really my
that's sort of
question.
our
I mean,
guess.
I'll give you the easy answer
Right.
would be parking or traffic, right? But that's being gutted as we speak, right? On any new development, commercial or residential. So I'm just, I don't want to play in the weeds, right? But it's just, to me, this is an example of, if we're going to do this thing, are we only going to ever do this when we're reacting to the state? And are we not going to actually just sit down and say, okay, here's 30 anecdotal examples, and I am a shill for always saying there's another side to the story from the staff benefit. I am the total shill for that because I know it's true half the time. But the other half of the time when it's not true and it's actually an impediment, at what point do we line these things up, whether it's our way we determine livable or non-livable, our view that that it will cause an impact, but then we struggle to say, oh, what's that impact? Or the quick ones I can give, those impacts are being stripped away. Consideration of those impacts are being stripped away left and right from us during the day, every day. So I don't know. I'm struggling not to just say this isn't cooked and it bothers me, and still support the need to get this in, react to state law, but not miss this opportunity to start taking low-hanging fruit. Okay, that wasn't a question. So, sorry. I haven't done this very long. I'm brand new. Okay. Can you talk to me about livable and non-livable space and the way we define that? I'm not really sure what that means, and so I took from that letter that people feel we are making again, our own determination of livable and non-livable, which may not be how other communities are making a determination of livable and non-livable. And so could you tell me what that means, what that complaint is, and what's at stake here?
So, Chair Sneddon, Committee Member Jordan, staff is not proposing to amend the citywide definition of non-livable floor area with the proposed ADU ordinance amendments. There may be greater implications for other types of projects or unintended consequences that staff would need to evaluate. The term residential amenity area is a little broad, and this is referring directly to the RRM letter. And staff would prefer to be more specific about what that means as well. Currently, any room that is unheated or unconditioned space is considered non-livable. And this could include an exterior laundry room or similar.
And you can or can't convert that?
You can convert.
You can convert the non-livable.
Correct.
It's the livable, the existing livable that you can't convert?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that?
Just to clarify that point, so you can convert livable and non-livable to one standard ADU.
Okay.
So most ADUs are the one standard ADU that people propose, and that can be converted accessory buildings, part of the unit, part of the house, or non-livable space like a garage or a basement. So that's allowed everywhere. The special ADUs is if you want to do more than one ADU, and that's limited to the non-livable space, if you want more than one.
And do special, you have to remind me, do special ADUs exist out of fire zones?
Right, so the
Yes.
special ADUs are used in the high fire area, the foothill and extreme foothill high fire area. That's limited to the special ADU.
Outside of those zones also?
You could if you wanted more than one.
Okay. And there's
ADU.
specifically, special ADUs are called out for having to be incorporated into what would then become mixed use. So former commercial, now mixed use,
Right.
right?
Correct.
And so maybe that's the rub, is where you have space in an existing commercial building that you want to convert to an ADU, and your only choice is to do a special ADU, and there's a disconnect there between our determination of livable or unlivable in our definition and how much of that space you can use?
I don't believe the livable floor area would limit we're not proposing that would limit the ability to convert
Okay?
commercial space. That's the city's own addition to the ADU ordinance. That's not in the state law. Livable floor area refers to residential floor area, like a bedroom or somewhere that you live. So the conversion of commercial space already isn't livable. Is that?
Okay. And then explain to me this, do part of the project, circle back around and do when this happens and why they can't go in tandem at the same time.
So
Or you can't get maybe you can't get your approvals at the same time, your allowances. You have to do something first, then come back and ask to do something second when you could have done it all at the same time, at the same place.
Chair Sneddon, Committee Member Jordan, the city does allow concurrent processing of a new primary unit and a new ADU. Separate building permit applications are required, but they may be submitted and processed at the same time. The permit for a primary unit must be issued first or at the same time as the permit for the ADU. The two units can be constructed at the same time. However, the certificate of occupancy, or the C of O, on the primary unit must be granted before the ADU, and that's consistent with the state law requirements.
Okay, and is this true for any category of ADU?
I believe so, yes.
Committee Member Jordan, that they can be processed concurrently?
Yep.
Yes, so the conversion of non-livable space says it has to be existing.
Okay.
So if you had a vacant lot and you were trying to propose a new development and then use that category, that wouldn't work because it's not existing, but you could use a different category to get your ADU at the same time as your primary unit. There's multiple categories of ADU. Some are converting, and some are new construction.
Okay, I'm more at your mercy than you're at mine here, because I saw this letter for the first time at 8 o'clock last night, and I don't know what they're talking about really, other than, okay, there seems to be an issue, so. I think I just have a couple more. I just wanted to confirm, so you used an interesting phrase on one of your slides that in, I think, the history of the world, we've had 916 ADU applications. There's really only of those, the number was actually in the Planning Commission staff report, 300 some certificates of occupancy. Does that sound right?
Committee Member Jordan, I wanted to just go ahead and pull up that slide real fast. Okay.
And the one I'm looking at in your one was slide 6, where it just talks about the applications, not the not what has been, not what's done on the ground, the COOs.
Okay, committee member Jordan, I've pulled up this slide here as a backup slide. On this slide, we have a map that shows all of the conversions and attached additions and the new attached ADU projects since 2017. And yeah, so let's see here. So since 2018, there has been a consistent steady stream. So, yes, of those 397 have received certificate of
So
occupancy.
almost
and-
400.
Correct.
Okay, not four, okay, okay. So, okay, thank you.
Sure.
So I think that would be a good number to have on that slide. You did the definition. Okay, I think I'm
For now.
way farther along than I want to be already. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. And Councilmember Gutierrez, do you have questions?
Thank you. Yeah, I just had a question, and sorry for sounding like a broken record, but is there any way we could put a stipulation that states that in order to build one of these ADUs, the tenant cannot own a vehicle in order to alleviate the parking situation in the neighborhoods? Anything from the state that's coming with that kind of rhetoric?
Yeah, Chair Sneddon, committee member Gutierrez, I'm not aware of any way we can do that. We do that with affordable housing projects, particularly when the housing authority is involved, because they're very involved with their tenants and they have a long-term relationship as a public entity. I'm curious if Ms. Ostringer is aware of anything.
No, I can't see any way we could restrict it really by ordinance, but on a broader scale of looking into the future, perhaps there's incentives that could be offered to property owners to ensure that their renters don't have tenants should they choose, or excuse me, don't have vehicles should they choose to rent them out, but nothing in the ordinance to restrict it. I would say that state law is very permissive as to not requiring parking in order to at least get more housing, but I understand where you're coming from, Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you. Yeah, because I know neighborhoods like the west side and the east side, parking as it is now is pretty hard. So when we talk about incentives, can we, okay, you just answered my question, but I was gonna say if it's possible to make the incentive to expedite the permitting process if they can guarantee their tenants don't own cars, but I guess that's hard to mitigate.
Thank you. And if more questions arise, please feel free to interject. And I do think Ordinance Committee is for the weeds, so I'm going to apologize ahead of time that I have a lot of questions. Some of them are just confirmations, just confirm for me that I'm understanding this correctly. And I wasn't sure how to structure, so I think I'll just go through staff report and then the attachments and then the ordinance to make sure. And then I did have a couple questions from the slides, but I'll try to just make them brief. So starting with the staff report on page 1, just that second paragraph under the executive summary, conversion of commercial portions of mixed-use buildings to ADUs and construction of 2 ADUs or double ADUs on existing multi-unit properties. And my question here is it only multi-unit? It's kind of a compound question. Does this not affect single-family zoned areas, these double ADUs? And then really this question, if it already has an ADU on it, is that a new starting point considered multi-unit property? or is it what it was originally constructed as?
Chair Sneddon, let's see, two questions there, right? So the first was, can you have a double ADU on a single-unit residence property?
Yes.
Right? The answer is no. You could have a junior ADU
Okay.
and a detached ADU, but not two detached ADUs.
Okay,
That's only
thank
for
you.
multi-unit.
That's actually going to answer a lot of my subsequent questions with wording in there that I think it does need to be very spelled out, or for me, anyway. Thank you. And then what about that, if once you have an ADU, are you now considered a multi-unit starting point? Could you then later apply after this ordinance as like, oh, well, I already was multi-unit because I have a J ADU and a detached ADU?
That's a great question. ADUs are accessory to the primary unit, so they're not included in the general plan or zoning density for a site. So it would still be considered a single-family home or a single-unit residence plus this accessory unit. So
Okay.
it doesn't turn it into multifamily.
Thank you. That's an important point, too, for me. And then on page 2, and there are these definitions, and I realize the staff report isn't the ordinance, but it just helps with my understanding. The definitions of, or the discussion of special ADUs, and then it says one or more may be allowed on a lot, and then a later bullet point confirms, but only one ADU on lots in extreme foothill and foothill high fire areas. I just want to confirm that that's correct.
Chair Sneddon, so you could still do the junior ADU and the detached ADU.
Okay, so then when it says only one ADU allowed on lots within the extreme foothill and foothill high fire areas on page 3, that's only one detached ADU.
Correct. One detached ADU.
Could
and then-
include one junior ADU.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. And then on page 4 in staff report, just the discussion of the convert upper floor commercial areas to ADUs. I have 2 questions on this. One, I'm really appreciative, just a comment, really appreciative to see ways of looking for adaptive reuse. And so this would be only in commercial zones, is that correct? This wouldn't apply to areas that are zoned residential, or would it, if there happened to be a business there?
Chair Sneddon, yes, that's accurate.
Okay, thank you. And then I'll just make the comment and ask the question. I would be okay with it being on ground level if it was away from the street. I can think of one example. There was a jeweler on State Street who had, we have these long corridors of parcel construction there, that they were saying if they could put the back of their unit and live there with, window, door, all of the regular ADU requirements, then the front could be the shop and the back could be a living space. And I was just wondering your comments on that, or do you think that would be something we could include?
Chair Sneddon, that is something we want to address with our adaptive reuse ordinance more specifically. The general concern is conversion of commercial space, like along State Street in commercial corridors, or even like neighborhood serving commercial areas like San Andres, Micheltorena area. We do want those ground floor spaces used for non-residential use moving forward for the most part. But you bring up a good point. Some of these tenant spaces are very deep, and that configuration isn't as desired anymore. But since this is coming through right now, we did want to include this, knowing we're going to circle back to it. And just to be clear about this too, this has to be for a mixed-use property, so there has to already be one residential unit at least in the building or on the property.
Thank you. That answers my question on that too. So we will be working on a mixed-use ordinance separately that will address the specific. Okay, thank you. And then on this table of local standards, there are a couple of things I just want to confirm. and this is on page 4 of the staff report, the open yard reduction for ADU over detached garage. And I just had a couple questions here about this 150 square foot area. In the sort of paragraphs above or the text, it talks about that being used for electrical utilities, that kind of thing. And then it starts later in the ordinance and here talking about staircases, laundries, storage, workshop. And I just have some questions about that. That seems to me, I mean, 150 square feet on top of, say, 800 square feet is a lot, a lot more. And what is the thinking behind like these specific delineations?
Chair Sneddon, thank you for requesting more clarity regarding this. So please see this example demonstrating the new open yard reduction amendment. In yellow is a proposed 2-car garage with an ADU above. Based on the lot size, this ADU is allowed to reduce the required 1,250 square foot open yard for the primary residential unit to allow 800 square feet. Seen in green as 2 400 square foot segments. With this new open yard reduction, a maximum 150 square foot storage room addition is also allowed, which is shown in red. And so, I'd like Ms. Belts to maybe weigh in because she has a little bit more anecdotal evidence for applicants that are requesting modifications such as this. Well, I shouldn't say modifications, but additions such as a utility space. But it has been her experience that this is something that has been a rub for many ADU applicants that are requesting just this small utility space.
That's actually enough of an answer, and I just want to confirm it's 150 square feet total. So it
Yes.
wouldn't be per each additional ADU, or one for a workshop, one for a laundry facility, one for a stairwell. It's 150 square feet total.
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, we confirm that, yeah. Okay, thank you. And then converting non-livable space. We don't really anticipate that this would be in the foothill or extreme foothill on multi-unit developments. I'll save that question, actually. I think that one was already answered. For configuration, also on that table, I just want to confirm again that in the foothill and the extreme foothill, you can only have one detached and one junior ADU total. Maximum.
That's correct, Chair Sneddon, if it's a single unit residence.
Okay, thank you. And then I have a whole bunch of questions about maximum height, and I won't ask it right here, but I'm going to ask it further on. I'm sure that's a sticking point in some places. Okay, so I guess it is right here too, in the staff report, to the next page on heights. One easy question, I guess. Solar panels. If we anticipate that ADUs might be built with solar panels on top of them, is that height included in the total maximum with that extra 2 feet allowance or the other allowances, or would that be on top of all of that?
Chair Sneddon, that is a great question that I hadn't even considered, but Ms. Belts just whispered in my ear, no.
Not
So,
included?
Not included.
Okay, so I would propose that including solar panels, it be to that maximum height because, you're going up to 18 and then an additional 2, and then the solar panels, and they're reflective. So in hillside areas, I think that starts really stacking.
Chair Sneddon, if
yeah.
I may, with regards to solar arrays, there is a streamlined permitting, and we can't regulate it. So I could foresee that someone would build up to 18 feet and then come in and request solar panels, and we could not reject that application for a solar panel.
Correct, and I wouldn't want you to. We want solar everywhere, but I'm wondering about if we know that everything has to be solar ready, and we would hope that people use a streamlined application, that we might not take that potential into account instead of going to the 20 feet with that extra 2-foot buffer, that they reserve that for the potential of solar panels?
I actually have to research that. It's a good
Yeah.
question of whether state law would allow us to go ahead and restrict, or if we just generally restrict height in general, knowing that there's that buffer that could possibly need to be there.
Okay. I think it's, yeah, I think it's an important question for the hillside there too. And then for maximum heights in response to state mandated height increases, for special ADUs, it's a maximum of 1 story. And how tall is that 1-story limit? Is that what we're saying will go to the 18 feet and a 2-foot buffer?
Chair Sneddon, yes, that's correct. So currently, the special ADU maximum height is 16 feet, and staff is proposing an 18-foot maximum with an additional 2 foot or 2 feet in height if necessary to match the roof pitch. And the height of the primary residential unit, but staff thinks it's important to ensure that there's only 1 story allowed for those special ADUs, and that's with regards to remaining sensitive to our high fire areas and density.
Thank you. So it's still 1 story. And I suppose maybe that is where, instead of having the 2 feet necessary to match the pitch, I would rather reserve that 2 feet in case they want to go solar later. I think that'd be more important than matching the pitch of the roof. I'll just put that in there now, that if there is that 2 feet, that we might not want to use it all up with roof pitch. Okay, and then into attachment 1 for the cleanup items. So high fire hazard area parking. And I understand this 1 per unit or bedroom, whichever is less. I read that to mean 1 per unit, I guess, because unless it's a studio, you're saying. And my question, and I think this is probably for our fire marshal too. So in my mind, we need designated parking in those high fire areas where the roads are narrow. And I'm wondering if there could be some amendment there to say, if there's curb parking, or if the road is a certain width, or if the road is narrower than a certain width, or doesn't have curbed parking, designated curbed parking, then we could require an off-street parking space. If you could speak to that.
Sure. Chair Sneddon, I agree that parking is obviously an issue in that area. I'd probably have to defer to transportation a little bit too. They might be able to weigh in on some of those parking requirements. As far as the access goes, as you know, a lot of those roadways are just non-compliant, non-conforming to meet California law. So I could see that throwing in an amendment to having some kind of off-street parking. Again, it might be an enforcement issue of who is actually going to enforce that parking besides PD. I think we all know that having an agreement on a piece of paper doesn't always pan out in real life. So I'm a little leery to have an agreement between somebody who's constructing a special ADU in the high fire hazard area for off-street parking and taking their word for it, for a lack of better terms, because it's going to clog up an already clogged up emergency evacuation zone.
I suppose it's twofold, my thoughts on that. One, it could be complaint-driven. There's so many streets where you regularly do not have room for a vehicle to pass if other cars are crowded on the other side and it's a hairpin turn. And if it's something that's a repeated problem, it could be complaint-driven for enforcement if it were in place. And the other is that those lots are generally so much larger and they have so much more space for off-street parking. Can we require it? No. And that's even if it's beyond the half-mile transit.
Chair Sneddon, I believe there is, and Ms. Belts can correct me if I'm wrong, but they set the parking maximums for the special ADUs, and is it help me out, Ms. Bell, says it's one or less.
One per unit or bedroom, whichever is less. But how could you be less than one on that? I don't understand the wording, to be honest.
Chair Sneddon, yes, that's why we are proposing to revise the wording, because it's confusingly written. So we made it clear that a studio unit would be exempt from parking, because it doesn't have any bedrooms.
We took that from state law and
Right.
decided it wasn't good language.
So is state law says one per unit or bedroom, whichever is less?
That's correct, yes.
I'd like to keep that because I interpret that to mean one. I mean, a unit is a studio.
We interpreted that to mean a studio would be exempt from parking.
A studio's not a unit,
It doesn't have any bedrooms.
but is it a unit?
Well, it says whichever's less.
Right, but it's either, I mean, you have to have one in there somewhere. One per unit or one per bedroom, whichever's less. So you'd still get to one instead of zero. I like this wording better.
Okay.
Okay. Can you, or maybe you can offline explain to me why I'm not understanding that the one or one, whichever is less, still gets you to one? Oh, zero bedroom?
Right.
That's your zero.
Yeah, a studio has 0 bedrooms, so it's 0, and 0 is less than.
That's where your
than
zero
one.
comes
Yeah,
from.
it's oddly written.
All right. Well, if there's any way to look at having parking off-street in those narrow or non-curbed, non-compliant streets, I think it would be in public safety's interest for evacuation. If we could look at that. Okay, sorry. Okay, so then just confirming on attachment 2, the maximum height, we're going to alter from 16 and 17 to 18 feet. From my thinking, I think we might as well leave 16 for special ADUs, and that allows that 2 feet and the 2 feet buffer if there's solar. Is that possible to leave it at 16?
Chair Sneddon, I apologize for my pause. I just was trying to gauge eyeball consensus that it's, this is a state law mandate, so the 18-foot is required.
Okay, the 18-foot is required.
Yes.
Okay, but the extra 2-foot buffer is not required.
That's
us
required
throwing that
to,
in.
should the ADU want to match the roof pitch.
That's state required.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. So then to the ordinance itself, apologize, I have a lot of check marks. Yes, yes, those are fine. Oh, page 7, I don't know where this is. It says number 6, but I don't know what letter goes before it. Removal of recorded owner occupancy requirement before January 1st, 2020. Could you just highlight for me why that date? Did we remove covenants or what that was that happened? It's page 7 of attachment 3.
Chair Sneddon, that, we just added the date.
Okay.
Previous, it just said adoption of this ordinance, so we just added.
From when
what-
this was initially
Right,
adopted.
correct.
Okay, thank you. And then on page 10 of attachment 3, all my questions are just for attachment 3. For D and the redlining there, can you confirm that this is not FAR somehow, but that it's an 800 square foot maximum? There's Florida area ratios thrown in there, which I don't remember being part of the equation before, but we could,
Chair Sneddon, the state law says that there's certain state mandated ADUs that you have to allow no matter what.
Okay.
So if there was a site that exceeded the FAR, they could still propose an 800 square foot ADU. And
Okay.
it would have to be approved without a FAR modification.
okay, so up to the 800.
Correct, maximum 800, yeah.
Maximum. Thank you. And then I already asked the questions about the open yard, and thank you for that. And that storage workshop or whatever it is, I think I already confirmed it in here. It still needs to be in the setback, right? Okay. Thank you. And then back to heights. I guess I'm going to ask this a million different ways, but I guess the slides highlighted some things that I had not thought of before. So on slide 19, I guess it is, you can have a 2-story ADU on top of a garage? Is that what that is?
Sorry. That's showing a 2-story ADU with a garage on the first floor and an ADU above. A standard ADU. So it's
A
not-
standard ADU that could be 2 stories?
Correct, yes.
So that, to me, is a 3-story building?
No, I'm sorry, that's not what I meant. So it's a 2-story building with a garage on the first floor and the ADU on the second floor. It's only a
No, I
2-story
get
building.
it. To me, that's a 3-story building.
2 stories.
Well, 2 stories of livable space and 1 story of,
No, it's
non-livable.
2 stories total. First floor garage.
that's what example 6 looks like to me. A garage and a 1-story ADU.
Maybe our slides aren't very clear, but that little white line kind of in between is trying to show that that's a 2-story ADU on example 6. And example 5 is showing a 2-story building, but only the second floor is the ADU. The first floor is a garage.
Okay, and that ADU is only 1 story?
Correct, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Because it looked to me like suddenly we had and we don't have that 2-story ADUs on top of a garage.
No, you can't have a 3-story
Okay, thank
accessory
you.
building.
Okay,
Correct.
That's what I thought I was seeing
Yep.
there. So that, thank you for explaining that. Okay, that's the heights. I'm almost finished. I guess I don't want to get too much into design style because we've already talked about this one so much on page 16. But there's so much advancement in prefabricated ADU units. And I'm wondering if some of the wording as it was before, that it be compatible, actually sounds more flexible to me than that it, has to be used the same style, same building materials, colors, finishes. I mean, there's like green building pods and really beautiful construction that is better than what the primary residence was. Thoughts on that?
Chair Sneddon, I agree with you. The new amendments to the ADU ordinance, or to the ADU state law, said that all of our standards have to be objective. So
Okay.
we had to tweak the language a little bit to make it more black and white and less flexible, as you say.
Okay. So actually more restrictive in the end.
More restrictive in the end. Applicants do have the option to go to discretionary design review if they don't meet the ministerial criteria for approval. So if they had a building that looked better or looked different or looked interesting and they wanted to get approval for it, there is a path to do that.
There is a path. So if
Yes.
I wanted a green building on there and it looked similar but wasn't exactly the same, I could still go through
That's correct.
discretionary process. Okay.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Okay, then we can leave that. I think we're almost finished. Oh, for the striking the 2-bedroom limitation, I just want to confirm, but that's still 800 square feet maximum on that page 23, Ms. Ostringer?
Chair Sneddon, yes, that will not go away.
Okay. And then for the number of bedrooms, is there a number of bathroom requirement? Or should there be?
Chair Sneddon, there's no maximum. You have to have one. There's a minimum of one, but there's no maximum.
One for the whole unit, but
One
if
for the-
you have 5 bedrooms in there, is there any?
There's no maximum number of bathrooms or bedrooms. So
but
you need to have at least one bathroom and one kitchen.
So it would be okay to have 1 bathroom for 5 bedrooms?
That would be okay, yes.
So that's a dorm, basically, yeah. I'm just wondering if we might want to look at that just for health and safety, number of bathrooms per unit. Okay, I'm almost finished. And then just general considerations. Is there anything about windows? Do we have requirements in here for, especially for those conversions? Anything about windows or circulation, air circulation, anything like that? I didn't see any mention of windows, but. And that could be answered later. I don't mean to,
Chair Sneddon, there's some privacy requirements for windows that, because ADUs have a 4-foot setback. There's some privacy rules about overlooking and overhanging neighbors.
Do they have to have at least one window?
That would be set by the building code.
Do we know if the building code requires at least one window in an ADU?
Chair Sneddon, I'll take a stab at it,
Okay, thank you.
even though I'm not totally completely sure about ADUs. I will say in the building code, there are window requirements for single-family dwellings.
Okay,
So my guess is that it bleeds over into ADU.
okay.
And that
That's fair
yeah.
enough. Yeah, fair enough. And then, do we have public commenters? Those are end of my questions. Oh, and Councilmember Gutierrez has some follow-up questions.
It might have been covered already when I stepped out, so forgive me. But what's the time frame for the permitting process for an ADU?
Committee Member Gutierrez, we have a 60-day turnaround requirement.
Really, that's it? So basically 2 months?
That's correct.
Have you received any comments about that taking too long? Or are most customers satisfied with that period?
I might defer to Brenda Beltz, since she's had a more intimate relationship with those applicants and their frustrations, potential frustrations.
Committee Member Gutierrez, it's sort of hard to answer. I think all people wish the process would go faster. It is expedited. We have one plan checker solely devoted to nothing but accessory dwelling unit plan checks. So they do get put to the head of the line, and we plan check them within that 60-day timeline.
So in the last, what is it now, 5 years, there's been 916 applications. And are those just applications, or have they actually gone through completion?
So, Committee Member Gutierrez, yes, so since 2018, only 397 have received certificate of occupancy, 229 are under construction, and 283 are in the permit process.
Okay, so you have one staff person going through all those applications over the last 4 years. Any way we can expedite it any quicker?
Committee Member Gutierrez, it's my understanding that our ADU plan checker has done a tremendous job meeting the 60-day requirement. As far as potentially streamlining or expediting that process, I don't know if I can necessarily speak to this, but perhaps Mr. Gullett can.
Chair Sneddon, Committee Member Gutierrez, if we had additional resources, I don't know that we would want to put them on ADUs. We see it as a reasonable time frame. Some people, as mentioned, would like it faster, but we would probably put those resources to speeding up other permits that don't have these statutory deadlines to get those moving a little bit better.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Do we have public commenters?
We do, Chair Sneddon. We have one individual that's raised their hand. I'll make an announcement now to the others who are logged in. If you would like to speak on this item, please raise your hand within the app. Currently, we have Steve Purcell. Steve Purcell, can you hear us? He's got to unmute his mic.
Unmuted now. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Madam Chair and members, forgive me if you mentioned this while I was out grabbing some lunch real quickly, but my interest is with SB 9. And I noticed that with the accessory dwelling units, they've done this follow-up cleanup legislation. And so I anticipate that they will probably do some with SB 9 as well, because I am contemplating doing one, but I don't want to get ahead of myself before the changes come like they have with the accessory dwelling unit. And the only thing in your information packet that refers to SB 9 says, does SB 9 have any impact on ADUs? And the answer to that is contains some overlap with state ADU law, but only on a relatively small number of topics. So I guess my question is twofold. One is, any of these changes that are occurring now with the ADUs overlap changes that will occur with SB 9?
Excellent question. Thank you, Mr. Forcell. Do we have any other public commenters?
We do not.
Okay, thank you. Could we have maybe a response to the considerations with SB 9?
Chair Sneddon, I can't think of any impacts that these amendments would have on SB 9. I haven't looked at it carefully, but nothing comes to mind.
Okay, thank you. I also read it with that lens and didn't jump out at me anything. So I do appreciate before it comes to council to have that just confirmed that there's no conflict there. So we have a few minutes here. Our options are to hold this for further discussion or to make our comments speedy quick, or what would the committee like to do? Councilmember Jordan, move forward.
Thank you. If you can't tell from my questions, I'm frustrated, but whatever. I've lived 13 years of frustration. But I'm confident what I'm hearing from staff is what they want to do now and what we can do now. You guys have the absolute worst job at the worst time in the world, I'm sure, between the need for housing and the shortage of resources. So there's nothing in this really on face value that says we need to slow down. So I would be supportive as goes forward. But my frustration just grows every year. So I think the longer we continue to kind of globally not answer the question of what's it look like when we say we want more housing, and then tailor our procedures and processes to that, the longer we get frustrated. It's way too complicated. All we're doing is reacting. I think, to me, it speaks volumes that there's 400 of these approved, probably most of them in the last 2 or 3 years, then all the way back to 2017. And I never hear a complaint about them, never. But I hear lots of complaints about the other 500 trying to get there, or the ones that have given up trying to get there. And so to me, it's really important that sometime a council that's going to be here for at least a couple more years has an opportunity to say, what does it mean when we say we want more housing? And how does that translate to getting more housing? And I'm a big fan of ADUs. I think they pretty seamlessly, outside of fire zone, translate well into single-family neighborhoods. I'm really intrigued about doing all we can to incentivize and open the pathway to putting them in other areas too, if that's commercial properties or already multifamily properties, whatever that may be. I do believe that that people, the more you can get them into, particularly even the core or the central shopping areas, so like Milpas, the Mesa, that there will be less car use. And this whole car and parking thing that's being rammed down our throats already is really going to be a non-issue also. So I will support it going forward. I'll support any notes you have that need to be added to it going forward. But I'm going to stand up in January and say the same thing to you, probably a little more forcefully, that we let ourselves be behind the curve here by not producing the housing that we say we want. We're always reacting, and then we're always couching our reaction, trying to straddle maybe we're not sure what the political desire is for more housing and what that looks like. And I think that needs to be one of the key questions we answer pretty soon, rather than just keep getting told what we're gonna build. So that's all.
Okay,
Get
thank you.
Get off the soapbox.
Thank you, we'll have 2 minutes each for us, and then we'll make a motion and we'll be done. Do you have comments, Councilmember Gutierrez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just kind of want to thank you for the amount of work you put into this whole program, and just try to encourage you to see if it could be expedited. I know you're already doing a lot, but I think the faster, the better. Yeah, that's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, and I will just add too that I'm really appreciating the attention to detail here and the focus also on adaptive reuse that we've been asking for, and this is one avenue to get there, and we'll continue looking for others. I just want to ask the question really quickly: what is the maximum height that could be, instead of making a blanket citywide for the high fire, extreme high fire? What is the maximum height legally with state law?
That's 18 feet.
That's 18
Chair
feet.
Sneddon, yes.
And we would then have to allow the 2-foot buffer by state law as well?
That's
Okay.
correct.
And that's as written in the ordinance?
Correct.
Okay. So then I think this moves forward as it is. I'm recently seeing, those numbers, it's sort of an exponential curve of if you spread it over the 5 years, it's not that many completed, but if you're just looking recently, there are so many rapidly coming and being constructed, and it seems a successful way to infill with housing. And I really, truly appreciate the consideration for health and safety in the high fire areas. It's just, I think looking and picking up on comments from Councilmember Jordan, I think it would be great to have council have an ADU holistic update. How many there are in the city? Where are they? What are the income levels that those the needs that those are meeting? Maybe a workshop meeting. But I do think that there are some larger questions that don't get answered, ordinance amendment by ordinance amendment, that we seem to want the time for. So with that, do you want a motion to move this forward?
Chair Sneddon?
I'll move the staff recommendation with the changes that were talked about prior, which I didn't pay attention to, but I know you have, but I'll ask that those get included in the motion.
Ms. Ostrander?
Yes. Subsections 30.185.040 L4, subsection 28.86.090 D1, with reference only to the no more than 2 bedrooms will be removed from that section.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, with that, we will take a roll call vote.
The ordinance committee will forward staff recommendations with changes listed by city attorney to city council for adoption. Moved by Councilmember Jordan, seconded by Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez. Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez.
Aye.
Councilmember Jordan.
Yes.
And Chair Sneddon.
Yes.
It
Thank you. With that,
passes.
we are adjourned.